Think about the person you trust most in this world. Not your partner, not your parents, your best friend, the one who knows everything, the one you call at 2 a.m., the one who has seen you at your absolute worst and stayed anyway. Now, ask yourself, how well do you actually know them? Because I thought I knew Christine Wells better than I knew myself. 22 years. I was wrong. Here's what happened. My name is Renee. I'm 47 years old. I live in Louisville, Kentucky. Have for most of my adult life, though I wasn't born here. I work in hospital administration. I manage staffing and scheduling for a large medical center on the east side of the city, which sounds more impressive than it is on most days. Mostly it means I spend a significant portion of my life on the phone, mediating between people who are tired and understaffed and doing their best in impossible circumstances. I am good at managing complicated situations. I want you to keep that in mind as I tell you this story, because what I'm about to describe is the most complicated situation I have ever encountered in my life, and I did not manage it well. Not at first. Not even close. I was adopted when I was 3 days old. I need to say that clearly and without drama because it is simply a fact of my life, one I've known since I was old enough to understand what the word meant. My adoptive parents, Gerald and Patricia Moore, were good people, solid, quiet Louisville people who went to church on Sundays and kept their lawn neat and believed in hard work and not complaining. They could not have biological children. They chose me. I have never once felt unwanted by them. I want to be clear about that too. Gerald died when I was 31. Patricia is still alive. She's 78 now, lives in the same house I grew up in, still keeps the lawn neat. I see her every Sunday for dinner. She makes the same pot roast she has been making since 1987, and I eat it every time and tell her it's the best thing I've ever had, because it is, and because she's 88 years old, and I will tell her that pot roast is perfection until one of us is no longer here to have that conversation. So, my parents were good, my childhood was good, my adoption was not a wound. But there's always a but. The but in my case was curiosity, not desperation, not a hole that needed filling, just curiosity. The quiet, persistent kind that lives in the back of your mind and never fully goes away no matter how complete your life feels. I'm a woman who likes to understand things, who likes to know the full picture, who is professionally trained to look at incomplete information and find what's missing. Having a biological mother I knew nothing about was incomplete information. I had known for years that I could search. The laws around adoption records in Kentucky have changed significantly over the past 2 decades. It is much easier now than it used to be for adoptees to access their original birth certificates, to request identifying information, to make contact if both parties consent. I had known this was available to me for a long time. I had not done it. For reasons that are hard to explain, except to say that wanting to know something and being ready to know it are 2 completely different things. I was not ready. For years, I was simply not ready. And I had learned somewhere in my 40s to respect that about myself instead of pushing past it. What changed was Patricia. Not anything dramatic. She didn't get sick. She didn't say something that opened a door. What happened was much smaller than that. We were sitting on her back porch one Sunday evening last spring, and she was telling a story about when I was small, some ordinary memory about a trip to the zoo, and she stopped mid-sentence and looked at me with an expression I had never seen on her face before. Like she was memorizing something, like she was storing it away. And I thought, she's 78, she's healthy, she's sharp, she's fine. But she's 78, and one day she won't be here. And when she's gone, the last person who remembers me at 3 days old will be gone too. I drove home that night and I requested my original birth certificate. It took 6 weeks to arrive. I did not tell anyone I had done it. Not Gerald, he was gone. Not Patricia. I didn't want her to feel replaced or questioned, or any of the complicated things that adoptive parents sometimes feel when their children go looking. And not Christine. Which is interesting in retrospect, because Christine Wells is the person I tell everything to, has been since we were 25 years old and ended up seated next to each other at a work training and spent the entire lunch break talking instead of eating, and left that day with each other's phone numbers and a friendship that has never once required maintenance or effort. It has just always been there, the way certain things are just there, like weather or gravity. 22 years. I did not tell Christine I was searching for my biological mother. I have thought about that a lot since everything happened. Whether some part of me knew, whether some instinct I couldn't name was operating below the surface of my conscious mind, whether the fact that I kept this specific thing from the one person I tell everything to means something. I don't know. I genuinely don't know. The birth certificate arrived on a Tuesday in a plain envelope with the state seal in the corner. I sat in my car in the parking garage at work for 20 minutes before I opened it. My biological mother's name was listed as Sandra Mae Collins. Date of birth, April 3rd, 1954. Place of birth, Elizabethtown, Kentucky. I read it twice. Sandra Mae Collins. I said the name out loud in my car in that parking garage alone just to hear what it sounded like, what it felt like to say the name of the woman who gave birth to me and handed me to someone else 3 days later. It felt like nothing yet, just a name, just information. The feeling would come later, I knew that. Right now, it was just data. Sandra Mae Collins, born 54, Elizabethtown. I put the certificate back in the envelope. I went back to work, and I managed complicated situations for the rest of the afternoon, and went home and made dinner and watched television with Deshawn and did not say a single word about any of it. Over the next few weeks, I did what I am professionally trained to do. I researched. Sandra Mae Collins was not a difficult person to find. She was 70 years old and lived in the Louisville area, not the city itself, a suburb called Shively. She had a listed phone number, a Facebook profile that was mostly public, mostly photographs of a garden and a small dog, and occasional family gatherings. She appeared to have adult children. I could see them in the photographs, though the names were not always tagged. She looked ordinary. That was the word that kept coming to me. Not in a dismissive way, in the way that real people look when you encounter them outside of the narrative you've built around them. She was a small woman with silver hair and reading glasses pushed up on her head in most photos. She smiled easily. She had a dog named Biscuit. I thought. I stared at her Facebook photographs for a long time, trying to find myself in her face. The shape of her jaw, maybe? Something around the eyes, the way she held her shoulders. Maybe. I wasn't sure. I drafted 17 different first messages to her over the course of 3 weeks. I deleted all 17. Finally, on a Thursday night in late April, after Deshawn had gone to bed and the house was quiet, and I was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea that had gone cold, I wrote the 18th version. I told her my name. I told her I had been born in Louisville on February 14th, 1977, Valentine's Day, which my mother Patricia always called a sign, and adopted 3 days later. I told her I had recently received my original birth certificate and that her name was listed as my birth mother. I told her I was not reaching out with any expectations. I was not looking to disrupt anyone's life or claim anything or insert myself into a family that didn't know I existed. I simply wanted to know where I came from. I wanted to know if she was well. I wanted, if she was open to it, to meet her. I read it back 4 times. I sent it, and then I closed my laptop and went to bed and did not sleep at all. She replied the next morning. 8 sentences. careful and warm and slightly formal in the way that people are when they are trying to be precise about something important. She said she had thought about this day for a long time. She said she was glad I had found her. She said she had things she wanted to tell me that she had never been able to say to anyone else. She said yes, she would very much like to meet. She gave me her address in Shively. She said, "Come whenever you're ready. I'll be here." I read that message 6 times, and then I did something I had not done this entire time. I called Christine. Not to tell her about Sandra, just to hear her voice, just to feel the particular steadiness of 22 years of friendship while I was feeling very unsteady about something I couldn't yet explain. Christine picked up on the second ring the way she always does. She said, "Hey, you okay?" I said, "Yeah, just wanted to talk." And we talked for an hour about nothing important. I walked into that house. I sat down on a couch I had sat on 100 times before, in the home of a woman I thought I knew, who had just opened the door to me as my biological mother. And as I sat there, one question was consuming everything else. One question that I could not get past no matter what came after it. Christine knew. Christine had to have known. We had been best friends for 22 years. She had sat with me through every hard thing, every loss, every fear, every 2 a.m. phone call. And somewhere in those 22 years, she had known that the woman who gave birth to me was her mother, and she had never said a word, not once, not one single word.
Barbara Wells made tea. I want to say that because it is such an ordinary thing to do in an extraordinary moment, and I think that ordinariness is part of what kept me from completely falling apart in those first few minutes. She moved to her kitchen, the same kitchen I had stood in dozens of times over 22 years, eating her food, laughing at her stories, and she filled a kettle and set it on the stove, and got 2 mugs from the cabinet, and I sat on her couch and I watched her do it, and I thought, I know where she keeps the mugs. I have always known where she keeps the mugs. The small dog, Biscuit, exactly as I had imagined, jumped up beside me on the couch and pressed himself against my leg, and I put my hand on him automatically because that is what you do when a dog does that. And I sat there with my hand on a small, warm dog in the home of my biological mother, who was also my best friend's mother, and I waited. She brought the tea. She sat in the chair across from me. She looked at me for a moment, and then she said, "I need to tell you some things, and I need you to let me get through them before you ask questions. Can you do that?" I said I could. I'm not sure I was telling the truth, but I said it. She started talking. Barbara Wells, Sandra Mae Collins, the name she had used before she married, before she became Barbara, before she became Christine's mother and the woman I had known for 22 years, was 17 years old when she got pregnant, with me. 17. The father was a boy she had dated briefly in Elizabethtown. He was 19. When she told him he was pregnant, he disappeared so completely and so quickly that she sometimes wondered in the years since if she had imagined him entirely. She had not. She hadn't told her own parents until she was 5 months along, and it was no longer possible to hide. Her father, a strict, religious man whose opinion of her dropped permanently and visibly from that moment forward, told her she had 2 options: give the baby up or leave his house. She was 17 years old. She gave the baby up. Me. She had held me for 1 hour after I was born. She said that detail carefully. She looked at her tea when she said it. 1 hour. The nurses had let her hold me for 1 hour, and then they had taken me, and that was the last time she had seen me, until this morning. I sat with that. 1 hour.
47 years ago in Elizabethtown, Louisville, a 17-year-old girl had held me for 1 hour and then handed me to someone else and carried that for the rest of her life. I thought about Patricia, about pot roast, about Sunday dinners in the lawn, and Gerald, gone. I thought, 2 women loved me before I knew either of them. 2 women loved me. Barbara kept talking. She had left Elizabethtown after I was born, moved to Louisville, built a life, met a man named Robert Wells when she was 24, married him, had Christine at 26. Robert had known about me from the beginning. She had told him before they married. She had not been able to carry a secret of that size into a marriage. He had accepted it, loved her anyway. He had died 11 years ago, and she still talked about him with the particular grief of someone who has and will not fully recover. Christine. She paused when she got to Christine. She set her mug down on the coffee table. She said, "I need to explain, Christine." I waited. "Christine had told me about you when she was 21, Barbara said. She was home from college for the summer. I sat her down and I told her everything, about Elizabethtown, about her father knowing, about giving you up." 21. Christine had been 21 when she found out. We met when we were 25. Which meant that Christine Wells sat down next to me at that work training and spent the lunch break talking to me and left with my phone number. She already knew. She already knew who I was. Did she know it was me? I asked. My voice came out very flat, very controlled. Did she know when we met? Barbara looked at her hands. "Not immediately," she said carefully. "She knew your name from what I had told her, your birth name, Renee, and your birthday, February 14th. I said nothing. "When you told her your birthday," Barbara continued, "she called me that night." I thought about it. We had met in January. My birthday would have come up within the first few weeks. Christine always made a big deal of birthdays. She was that kind of person, the kind who remembered and celebrated and showed up. She had asked me my birthday within the first month of knowing me. I was certain of it. "What did she say?" I asked. "When she called you?" Barbara was quiet for a moment. She said, "Mom, I think I found her." The room was very still. Outside, the wind chime moved slightly. Biscuit shifted against my leg. "She found you," Barbara said softly, "and then she chose to be your friend, to be in your life without telling you, because, and I want you to hear this, Renee, even if you're angry, especially if you're angry, because she didn't know how. She was 25 years old and she had found her half-sister, and she didn't know what to do with that, so she did the only thing she could think of, which was to be close to you." Half-sister. The word landed in the room like something physical. Christine Wells was my half-sister. Same mother, different fathers. 22 years of friendship. 22 years of knowing each other's secrets and finishing each other's sentences and being in each other's lives in the particular way that only happens between people who have chosen each other completely. And underneath it all, blood. I stood up. I needed to move. I could not sit still with that information inside my body. I walked to the window and looked out at the front garden, the roses, the path, my car parked at the curb, and I breathed very slowly and carefully the way I had learned to breathe when things got overwhelming in situations I had to manage professionally. This was not a professional situation. "Why didn't she tell me?" I said, still at the window, not turning around. 22 years. At some point she could have told me. "I know," Barbara said quietly. "I told her things," I said, and my voice was doing something now that I didn't entirely have control over. "I told Christine things I have never told another living person. I trusted her completely, and the whole time—" I stopped. I pressed my hand against the window frame. "She should have told you," Barbara said, simply, without qualification. I told her that, many times over the years. She should have told you and she didn't, and I cannot explain it in a way that makes it okay, because it isn't okay. I turned around. I looked at this woman who was Christine's mother, my mother, who had held me for 1 hour 47 years ago and thought about me every day since. I believed that. Looking at her face, I believed it completely. "Does she know I was coming today?" I asked. Barbara shook her head. "I didn't tell her," she said. "When you messaged me, when I realized it was you, I didn't tell Christine. I thought you deserved to know first, to decide what you wanted to do with it before Christine was any part of it." I looked at her for a long moment. And then I sat back down, because there was more I needed to know, more I needed to understand before I could decide anything, before I could figure out what to do with the fact that my best friend of 22 years had known something fundamental about who I was and had chosen, over and over for 2 decades, not to tell me. "Tell me everything," I said, "from the beginning, all of it." Barbara nodded. She picked up her tea. And she told me. She talked for 2 hours. She told me about Elizabethtown and the boy who disappeared and her father's ultimatum. She told me about the 1 hour. She told me about meeting Robert and building a life and telling Christine. She told me about Christine's reaction, not simple, not clean, a young woman processing the existence of a sibling she had never known and didn't know how to find. And then she told me about the years after Christine found me, the years I had no idea about. Christine had called her mother after every significant moment in our friendship. When I got married, Christine had called her mother that night. When I miscarried, 2 years into my marriage, and called Christine crying at midnight, Christine had called her mother afterwards. When I got the promotion at the hospital, when Deshawn and I had our first real serious fight, and I stayed at Christine's apartment for a week. Barbara had known about all of it. She had followed my life through her daughter's reports for 22 years. She had a box. She showed it to me toward the end of those 2 hours, a shoebox, different from the ones in stories. This one was newer, a brand she still bought, filled with things Christine had given her over the years. A photograph from my wedding that Christine had printed for her, a newspaper clipping about a community initiative I had led at the hospital 3 years ago, a birthday card I didn't call Christine that night, or the next day. I needed time. I needed to sit with everything Barbara had told me and let it settle into something I could understand. But on the 3rd day, Christine called me. She said, "Renee, my mom called me." Her voice was different, not the Christine voice I had known for 22 years. Something underneath it. Something that sounded like a person who has been carrying something very heavy for a long time and has just been told, "The weight is coming off now, whether you're ready or not." "I know," I said. Silence. Then, "I'm so sorry." And what came after that sorry changed everything I had thought I had already decided. Christine wanted to meet in person. I said no, not yet. Not on the phone either. I wasn't ready for that. I told her I needed a few days, and she said okay, and that was the entirety of our conversation. 40 seconds maybe, the shortest exchange we had ever had in 22 years. I hung up and sat with the silence of it. Christine Wells had said, "I'm sorry." 2 words, the most insufficient 2 words in the English language for what she had done, and also the only 2 words available, and I had heard something in them, something in the particular way she said them, the weight behind them, that told me this was not a simple sorry. This was not the sorry you say when you bump into someone in a hallway or forget to return a text. This was the sorry of someone who has been rehearsing it for 22 years. I gave myself 3 days. 3 days of going to work and managing complicated situations and coming home and eating dinner with Deshawn and not talking about it constantly, even though it was the only thing in my mind. Deshawn was good about it. He has always been good about giving me space to process things in my own time without pressure. It is one of the things I love most about him, and also one of the things that occasionally frustrates me, because sometimes I want someone to push, and he never pushes. I thought about Barbara during those 3 days. I thought about her a lot, actually, more than I thought about Christine, which surprised me. I called her on the second day, just to talk. She picked up immediately. I had the impression she had been hoping I would call, that she was giving me space, but hoping, and we talked for an hour. Not about Christine, just about things. Her garden, my work, a trip she had taken to see her sister in Lexington the fall. Ordinary things. It felt surprisingly natural, which was its own kind of complicated, because I had known Barbara Wells for 22 years as Christine's mother, as a woman I liked and respected and felt comfortable around without ever fully understanding why the comfort came so easily. Now I understood why. On the third day, I called Christine and told her to come over. She arrived at 7 in the evening. Deshawn had gone to his brother's house, his idea, not mine. He had offered without being asked, and I had been grateful. This was not a conversation for 3 people. Christine knocked even though she had a key. She had always had a key to our house, the way I had always had a key to hers. That's the kind of friendship we had, the kind where you don't knock. She knocked. I opened the door. She looked smaller than usual. That's the only way I can describe it. Christine is not a physically small woman. She's my height, strong, the kind of presence that fills a room. But standing on my porch that evening, she looked like something had gone out of her, some structural thing that usually held her upright. She had been crying recently. Her eyes showed it, even though she had clearly tried to do something about it before she came. She said, "Hi." I said, "Come in." We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I had told Deshawn everything, the same table where I had drunk cold tea the night I sent Barbara my first message. I made coffee neither of us really wanted, and we sat across from each other, and for a moment, neither of us said anything. Then Christine said, "I've been thinking about what to say to you for 3 days." "So have I said. I have about 40 different versions, explanations, justifications, things that are true but also sound like excuses. Tell me the one that isn't an excuse, just the truth." She looked at her coffee cup. She was quiet for a moment. And then she told me. When she was 21 and her mother told me about you, she had felt, she struggled to describe it, reached for several words before settling on one. She had felt completed, like a story she'd been reading that had a missing chapter had suddenly produced the chapter from nowhere. She had always known she had a half-sister, had grown up knowing. It had been a fact of her life since she was old enough to understand what her mother was telling her, that before Christine, there had been another baby, a girl, given up and gone, and out there in the world somewhere. She had thought about me her whole life, and then at 25, she had sat down next to me at a work training. She had not known immediately. She had known my name was Renee and my birthday was February 14th, but Louisville is not a small city, and those were not rare details to make her certain. But something had felt off, or not off, something had felt familiar in a way she couldn't immediately explain and couldn't dismiss. When I told her my birthday, she had gone home that night and called her mother and said, "Mom, I think I found her." And Barbara had said, "What do you mean?" And Christine had described me, my name, my birthday, my face, the way I talked, where I worked. And Barbara had gone very quiet on the phone. And then she had said, "Christine, that's her." Christine looked at me across my kitchen table. "I found out for certain 3 weeks after we met," she said. 3 weeks in. We were barely friends yet. We were still in that early stage where you're figuring out if someone is going to be real or just a work acquaintance. "And you knew," I said. And I knew. "Why didn't you tell me?" She had been waiting for that question. I could see it, the slight shift in her posture, the breath she took before answering. Because I was terrified, she said, of losing you before I even had you. We had just found each other. I had just found you, and I thought if I told you, you would run. You would feel ambushed. You would think the friendship wasn't real. The friendship wasn't real, I said, or it wasn't what I thought it was. It was real, Christine said, and her voice was very steady on that, more steady than anything else she had said. Renee, every single thing between us was real. I did not manufacture a friendship with you. I did not maintain it out of obligation or guilt. I chose you. Every day for 22 years, I chose you, not because you were my sister, because you were my person. I sat with that. You should have told me, I said. I know. There were 100 moments, 1,000. You could have told me at any point. I know. Why didn't you, really, not the 25-year-old reason, the 47-year-old reason? She looked at me for a long moment. Because every year that passed made it harder, she said quietly. The longer it went on, the more I started to understand that there was no right moment. And then the longer it went on, the more I started to understand that there was no right moment, that I had missed the right moment at 25, and every moment after that was just me living with that choice. I thought about 22 years of moments. My wedding, she had stood beside me, maid of honor. She had given a speech that made every person in that room cry. My miscarriage, she had driven to my house at midnight and sat on my bathroom floor with me. Every promotion, every fight with Deshawn, every 2 a.m. call, every Sunday dinner where I had sat at Barbara's table, eating Barbara's food without knowing I was sitting at my mother's table, eating my mother's food. Did it ever feel normal to you, knowing what you knew and just living normally alongside me? She shook her head slowly. Never. Not one single day. Every time you talked about wanting to find your birth mother, and you did, Renee, you talked about it sometimes, not often, but sometimes. Every time I felt sick, physically sick, because I knew, and I couldn't. She stopped. You talked about it a few times over the years, she said, about wondering, about what she might be like, whether she ever thought about you. I remembered, vaguely, the way you mentioned something that lives in the back of your mind, not a central conversation, just something that surfaces occasionally and then retreats. What did you say? I asked, when I talked about it. Christine looked at the table. I said, I'm sure she thinks about you. I'm sure she never stopped. The kitchen was very quiet, because that was true. Barbara thought about me every day, had thought about me for 47 years. Christine had known that and had told me carefully, without lying, without giving anything away, the truest thing she could say. I'm sure she never stopped. I stood up, walked to the window, the same thing I had done at Barbara's house, needing to move, needing to not be sitting still with this much inside me. I turned around. Christine was watching me from the kitchen table with an expression I had seen on her face before, once at her father's funeral, standing at his grave, the particular expression of someone who is losing something and knows it and cannot stop it. I'm angry, I said. I know. I'm very angry, and I need you to understand that before anything else. I understand. And I don't know what this looks like going forward. I don't know what we are now. I don't know if we can be what we were. Her jaw tightened slightly. She nodded. But, I said. She looked up. You are my sister, I said. I did not know that 3 weeks ago. I know it now, and I don't know what to do with it yet, but I know it. Christine pressed her lips together. Her eyes filled. She nodded. We sat in my kitchen for another 2 hours after that, not resolving everything. Some things cannot be resolved in a single evening, and I was not going to pretend otherwise. But talking, really talking, the way we had always talked, except now with something underneath it that had always been there, without either of us naming it. She left at 10. She hugged me at the door, the long kind, the kind that says things words aren't adequate for. I stood in my doorway and watched her walk to her car, and I thought, 22 years, all that time, she was right there. Deshawn came home an hour after Christine left. He found me sitting on the back porch in the dark. He sat down beside me without saying anything. After a while, I said, "I called Barbara today before Christine came." "How was that?" he said. "Good," I said. "Really good, actually. Strange and good." He nodded. We sat in the dark for a while longer. Then I said, "There's something else, something Barbara told me that I haven't told you yet." Deshawn looked at me. "When Christine found me," I said slowly, "when she figured out who I was at 25 and called her mother, Barbara said something to Christine that Christine never told me." "What?" Deshawn said. I looked out at our backyard, the dark garden, the fence, the ordinary nighttime shapes of a life we had built together. "Barbara told her," I said slowly, "that the choice of whether to tell me had to be Christine's, that she would not interfere, that she trusted Christine to do the right thing in the right time." "Okay," Deshawn said carefully. "But then she also said something else," I continued. "She said, 'Christine, there's something about this situation that I haven't told you, something specifically about Renee that you need to know before you decide anything.'" Deshawn was very still. "What was it?" he said. I turned to look at him. "That's the thing," I said. "Christine doesn't know. Barbara started to tell her and then stopped, said she needed to tell me first, said it was my information to have before it was anyone else's." "Did Barbara tell you?" Deshawn asked. I looked back at the dark garden. "Yes," I said. "And?" I was quiet for a moment. "It changes things," I said. "It changes some things I thought I understood about why all of this happened the way it did." Deshawn waited. "I'm going to need to make a phone call tomorrow to someone I haven't spoken to in a long time." "Who?" Deshawn asked. I looked at him. "My biological father." Deshawn came home an hour after Christine left. I found him sitting on the back porch in the dark. He sat down beside me without saying anything. After a while, I said, "I called Barbara today, before Christine came." "How was that?" he said. "Good," I said. "Really good, actually. Strange and good." He nodded. We sat in the dark for a while longer. Then I said, "There's something else, something Barbara told me that I haven't told you yet." Deshawn looked at me. "When Christine found me," I said slowly, "when she figured out who I was at 25 and called her mother, Barbara said something to Christine, something Christine never told me." "What?" Deshawn said. I looked out at our backyard, the dark garden, the fence, the ordinary nighttime shapes of a life we had built together. "Barbara told her," I said, "that the choice of whether to tell me had to be Christine's, that she would not interfere, that she trusted Christine to do the right thing in the right time." "Okay," Deshawn said carefully. "But she also said something else," I continued. "She said, 'Christine, there's something about this situation that I haven't told you, something about Renee specifically that you need to know before you decide anything.'" Deshawn was very still. "What was it?" he said. I turned to look at him. "That's the thing," I said. "Christine doesn't know. Barbara started to tell her and then stopped, said it was my information to have before it was anyone else's." "Did Barbara tell you?" Deshawn asked. I looked back at the dark garden. "Yes," I said. "And?" I was quiet for a moment. "It changes things," I said. "It changes some things I thought I understood about why all of this happened the way it did." Deshawn waited. "I'm going to need to make a phone call tomorrow to someone I haven't spoken to in a long time." "Who?" "Let me tell you what Barbara told me. The thing she had not told Christine, the thing she had held for 47 years and had decided, sitting across from me in her living room on a Saturday morning in May, that I needed to know before anyone else. The boy from Elizabethtown, the 19-year-old who had disappeared so completely when Barbara told him she was pregnant that she had sometimes wondered if she had imagined him, had not entirely disappeared. He had disappeared from Barbara's life. He had not disappeared from Louisville. His name was James Arthur Collins. He had moved to Louisville in his mid-20s, about the same time Barbara had. He had built a life here, married, had children, built a career in, and this is where Barbara's voice got very careful and very quiet when she told me, in hospital administration. I looked at her when she said that. She looked back at me steadily. "He works at your hospital, Renee," she said. "He's had for 11 years. I want to tell you that I reacted calmly to that information. I did not react calmly. I sat on Barbara's couch with biscuit pressed against my leg, and I felt something move through me that I cannot fully describe, a kind of vertigo, the particular dizziness of a world reorganizing itself faster than you can track. My biological father had been working in the same hospital as me for 11 years. "Does he know about me?" I asked when I could speak again. "No," Barbara said. "He doesn't know you exist. He doesn't know I went to Louisville. He doesn't know any of it. As far as James Collins is concerned, that chapter closed in 1976 when he walked away from a 17-year-old in Elizabethtown." "What's his role?" I asked, "at the hospital?" Barbara told me. I knew the name immediately. Not well, not personally, but the way you know the names of people who exist in the same institutional world as you, at meetings you both attend, on email chains you're both copied on, in the particular geography of a large workplace where certain people are fixtures without ever becoming individuals. James Collins. I had been in the same room with him, more than once. I sat on my back porch that night after telling Deshawn, and I thought about every meeting, every email chain, every moment I had been in the same physical space with a man who was my biological father without either of us knowing it. Had he ever looked at me and felt something he couldn't name? Had I ever looked at him? I didn't know. I genuinely didn't know. The mind is very good at not knowing what it isn't ready to know. I called Barbara the next morning. Not James, not yet. Barbara first. I asked her, "Why are you telling me this now? You've known he's been there for 11 years. Why now?" She was quiet for a moment. "Because you came," she said simply. "You found me, and once you found me, everything else became available. I couldn't tell you part of the truth. It had to be all of it." "Does Christine know he's at my hospital?" "No," Barbara said. "Christine knows his name. She knows the basic facts of what happened in Elizabethtown. She doesn't know where he ended up." I've thought about Christine, about the conversation the night before, about the thing Barbara started to tell her and then stopped. "There's something about Renee specifically you need to know before you decide anything." Christine had spent 22 years as my best friend, not knowing that our biological father had been 30 feet from me in conference rooms. That was almost funny. Almost. I took a week, a full week before I did anything else. I went to work. I passed James Collins in a hallway on the Wednesday of that week. I knew his face now. I had looked him up after Barbara told me, found his hospital profile photograph. And I watched him walk toward me and past me and away. He didn't look at me. Or he glanced, the way you glance at anyone passing in a hallway, registered, moved on. He had no idea. I stood in that hallway after he passed, and I breathed very carefully for about 30 seconds, and then I went back to work. On the following Monday, I called a therapist. I want to say that clearly, because I think it matters. I did not try to manage this alone. I have spent my career watching people try to manage impossible situations without support, and I have learned, professionally, practically, that this does not work. You need someone outside the situation, someone with no stake in the outcome.
Her name was Dr. Anita Bowman. She had a calm, precise manner that reminded me slightly of myself at work, and I found that reassuring. I told her everything in the first session. All of it. Barbara, Christine, James in the hallway. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "What do you want, Renee? Not what you think you should want, not what would be fair or right or appropriate. What do you actually want?" I thought about it. "I want to know her," I said. "Barbara, I want that to be real. I want to keep going there on Saturdays and drinking tea and talking about ordinary things until it feels as natural as it looks. And Christine?" Harder. "I want to be angry for a while longer, and then I want my friend back, and I want to figure out what it means that she's also my sister. I want both of those things to be true at the same time, even though I don't know how yet." "And James?" I was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know," I said. "I'm not sure I want anything from him. I'm not sure I owe him the effort of figuring out what I want." Dr. Bowman nodded. "That's allowed," she said. "That's 8 months ago. Let me tell you where things are now. Barbara and I have dinner together every other Saturday. Not at her house. We alternate. One Saturday at hers, one Saturday at mine. Deshawn has met her. They like each other. He made his grandmother's gumbo the first time Barbara came to our house, and she ate 2 bowls and asked for the recipe, and he gave it to her. And I watched that exchange happen and felt something I still don't have a word for. She came to Sunday dinner at Patricia's once. That was the most complicated afternoon of my entire life. 2 mothers, same table, Patricia's pot roast, Barbara's nervous hands wrapped around a glass of sweet tea. Patricia had known, not the specifics, not Barbara's name or face, but she had known for years that if I ever went looking, I would find someone. She had always known that. She had made her peace with it long ago in the particular way that Patricia Moore makes peace with things, quietly, completely, without drama. She passed Barbara the pot roast. She said it was the best she ever had. Patricia said, "Renee's been telling me that for 40 years. They both looked at me, and I laughed, a real one, the unexpected kind that comes up from somewhere deep. It was okay. It was more than okay. Christine and I are still figuring it out. That's the honest answer. We are in the process of becoming something new, and neither of us knows exactly what that something is yet. The friendship is still there. I feel it. She feels it. But it has been altered by what we now know, and there is no pretending otherwise. We don't pretend otherwise. What we do instead is show up. She comes over, we drink coffee, we talk, sometimes about this, sometimes about completely other things. We are learning how to be 2 women.
That's the whole story, or the part I'm ready to tell. I want to say something before I go. If you're adopted, if you have ever wondered, if you have ever sat with incomplete information about where you came from and not known whether to go looking, I cannot tell you what you'll find. I cannot tell you it will be simple or clean or what you imagined. Mine wasn't. But I can tell you this. The not knowing has a weight to it. And when the weight lifts, even when what's underneath is complicated, you can breathe differently. You just can. Thanks for listening.